From the outside, this farmhouse in Parkersburg, West Virginia looks like any other property you'd pass on a county road without slowing down. White siding, a rusted mailbox, fields stretching out in every direction that haven't produced a full crop in years. But if you walk around the back and look toward the creek running along the tree line, the one locals have been drinking from their whole lives, you'll notice something. The water moves slower than it should. And along the banks, where cattails used to grow, nothing grows anymore. This creek feeds the municipal water supply for a county of roughly 85,000 people. And for 11 years, the Environmental Protection Agency had a report sitting in a filing cabinet that described exactly what was in it. They didn't release it. This is the story of one farmer, one corporation, and one of the longest environmental cover-ups in American history. It is the story of what happens when a Fortune 500 company decides the cost of poisoning a community is cheaper than the cost of stopping. And it is the story of what it takes, and what it costs, for one ordinary person to make them answer for it. Much of what we know comes from internal corporate documents obtained through litigation, EPA correspondence released under Freedom of Information requests, and independent environmental reporting linked in the description. Chances are you wouldn't find Parkersburg on a map without looking it up. It sits in the northwestern corner of West Virginia, along the Ohio River, in a stretch of country once called Chemical Valley. The DuPont Corporation built a plant here in 1951. Washington Works, they called it. At its peak, it employed over 2,000 people and produced a chemical called PFOA, perfluorooctanoic acid, used in manufacturing Teflon. Most families in this county had someone who worked there. The plant was, in many ways, the reason the town existed. You didn't question it. You were grateful. This is Wilbur Tennant. He is a cattle farmer, not a scientist, not a lawyer, not an activist, just a man who raises cows on land his family has owned for 3 generations. In 1998, he starts losing animals. Not 1 or 2, dozens, then hundreds. His herd is dying, and he cannot explain why. The cows develop tumors. Their teeth turn black. Some go blind. Others foam at the mouth before collapsing in the fields. Wilbur walks his land and finds the creek bordering a DuPont landfill has turned colors he has never seen in a waterway. Black. Foamy. Wrong. He starts filming. He fills dozens of VHS tapes documenting the dead animals, the discolored water, the barren land. He shows them to local officials. He calls the county health department. He writes letters. No one comes. He is not a dramatic man. He does not hold press conferences. He does not call news stations. He drives to the county seat and sits in waiting rooms and fills out forms and is told, politely and repeatedly, that someone will look into it. Months pass. The cattle keep dying. The creek stays black. The county stays quiet. But that was just the beginning. In 1999, Wilbur finds a lawyer. Not a big firm environmental attorney. A personal injury lawyer from Charleston named Robert Bilott, who handles chemical cases for corporations. He is, in almost every professional sense, the opposite of what this fight requires. But Wilbur is the cousin of Bilott's grandmother. And Bilott agrees to take one meeting. He watches the tapes. All of them. He files suit. His colleagues think he is making a mistake. DuPont is not a company you take on lightly. It is one of the oldest and most powerful corporations in the United States. It has lawyers at every level of government. It has relationships with every relevant regulatory body. It has spent decades building the kind of institutional credibility that makes accusations against it sound, to most people, like the complaints of someone who simply doesn't understand how things work. Bilott understands exactly how things work. That is what makes what he finds so difficult to process. As part of the lawsuit, Bilott demands DuPont's internal documents related to PFOA. What arrives is not a file box. It is a delivery, literally thousands of documents filling a storage room, spanning more than 50 years of internal research. Bilott begins reading. What he finds inside those documents will take years to fully process. But the core of it is this. DuPont has known since at least 1961 that PFOA accumulates in the blood of living organisms and doesn't break down. In the human body, in soil, in groundwater, it persists indefinitely. Scientists inside the company begin calling it a forever chemical. By the early 1980s, DuPont's own internal studies show PFOA causes cancer in laboratory animals. By the mid-1980s, They have data showing elevated cancer rates among their own workers at Washington Works. By 1984, they have evidence that PFOA has contaminated the drinking water of surrounding communities. They tell no one. Not the workers, not the residents, not the EPA, not the state of West Virginia. For 2 decades, while families drink the water and bathe their children in it and never think twice, DuPont sits on the evidence. This is where things get interesting. Because it isn't just that DuPont failed to disclose. It is that they actively managed the process to keep the information buried. When the EPA began investigating PFOA in the mid-1980s, DuPont's response was not to cooperate. It was to negotiate, to delay, to provide partial data, to contest methodologies. Every tool available to a corporation with unlimited legal resources was deployed to slow accountability. And it worked. For 11 years after the EPA's own investigators documented the contamination and recommended action, the report sat, filed and forgotten while the people of this county kept drinking. Bilott finds the report buried in the discovery documents. In 2001, he does something almost no private attorney has done before. He bypasses normal channels entirely and writes directly to the EPA administrator. Not a filing, not a petition, a 67-page letter documenting, with DuPont's own evidence, exactly what was in the water, exactly when DuPont knew, and exactly what the EPA's buried report had concluded. The EPA opens a formal investigation. DuPont does not go quietly. The legal battle that follows spans nearly a decade. DuPont's lawyers contest every document, challenge every scientific finding, argue that PFOA, while present, cannot be definitively linked to specific health outcomes. They fund their own studies. They hire their own scientists. The full legal machinery of a Fortune 500 corporation is brought to bear against one lawyer, one farmer, and a county of 85,000 people who mostly still don't know what's happening. But Bilott keeps pulling. In 2004, DuPont settles with the EPA, agreeing to pay $16.5 million, the largest penalty in EPA history at that time for failure to report health risks. They admit no wrongdoing. They continue manufacturing PFOA for 2 more years. As part of the settlement, DuPont funds an independent scientific panel to study health outcomes in communities surrounding Washington Works, covering roughly 70,000 residents who have been drinking contaminated water for decades. The study takes 7 years. When it concludes in 2012, the panel finds what DuPont's own documents have been indicating for 30 years. PFOA is definitively linked to 6 diseases: kidney cancer, testicular cancer, ulcerative colitis, thyroid disease, high cholesterol, pregnancy-induced hypertension. Any affected resident with one of those 6 diseases is entitled to sue DuPont individually. 3,500 people file claims. DuPont fights every single one. The process is, by design, exhausting. Depositions scheduled and rescheduled. Documents requested and delayed. Motions filed to narrow the scope of what can be asked, what can be shown, what can be entered into evidence. Each individual plaintiff, already sick, often elderly, often dealing with the financial strain that serious illness brings, has to navigate a legal machinery built to outlast them. Some drop their claims. Some die before their cases resolve. The ones who persist do so at a cost that no settlement figure will ever fully account for. Now go back to the farmhouse. Back to Wilbur Tennant. By the time the science panel releases its findings, Wilbur is already gone. He died in 2009, before a single plaintiff received $1, before the full scope of what had been done was entered into any official record. He did not live to see it confirmed. But he had the tapes. He had filmed everything, for years, because something in him understood that if he didn't make a record, no one else would. And those tapes, shot by a farmer with no legal training and no institutional backing, became part of the evidence record that eventually forced the largest chemical company in the world to face what it had done. What Bilott discovers as the lawsuits proceed is that PFOA is not a DuPont-specific problem. The same chemicals, what scientists now call PFAS, have been used by dozens of companies across hundreds of industrial sites nationwide. They are in the water supplies of communities in Michigan, Ohio, North Carolina, Alabama, Minnesota, New Jersey. They are in the blood of 99% of Americans. They have been there for decades. Parkersburg is not an isolated incident. It is a case study in a national problem that no one had yet named. In 2017, DuPont spins off its chemical operations into a new company called Tumors, a move legal analysts widely interpret as structural liability management. The original entity grows smaller and harder to hold accountable. Tumors inherits the obligations and argues it should not be responsible for decisions made before its existence. It is a familiar playbook. Corporate restructuring as accountability avoidance. The damage stays. The responsible party moves. In 2021, DuPont, Tumors, and a third entity agreed to a combined settlement of more than $1 billion to address PFAS contamination of public water systems across the country. It covers remediation costs. It does not constitute an admission of liability for the health outcomes of the people who drank the water. No DuPont executive has ever been criminally charged. No EPA official connected to the buried report has ever faced professional consequences. The plant at Washington Works is still operating. Here in Parkersburg, the roads look the same as they always have. The farmhouses along the county roads look the same. In 2024, the Biden administration finalized the first federal limits on PFAS in public water supplies, a regulation decades in the making, driven in no small part by the evidentiary record that one personal injury lawyer from Charleston built by reading corporate documents in a storage room for 20 years. The regulation is already being challenged in court by the chemical industry. Wilbur Tennant filmed those tapes because he believed that if something true was documented clearly enough, someone with the power to act would eventually have to. He was right, in the end. But the gap between the documentation and the action, the years of delay, the buried reports, the restructured corporations, that gap is where most of the damage lived. In the bodies of people told the water was fine. In the farms that never recovered. In the families who spent decades being the difficult neighbors before the science finally confirmed what one man with a camera had been saying all along. The system eventually moved. It just made sure to move as slowly as it possibly could. And the people who decided how slowly it should move have never been made to answer for that. Not one of them. And until that changes, the story of Parkersburg is not history. It is a warning that is still being ignored.